Flintstones are often thought of as the moment that animation in North America transitioned from being a medium aimed primarily at children and moved on to the primetime stage. And while this is partially true, it wasn't the lovable residents of Bedrock who truly legitimized how limited animation could work on a larger scale. You're probably familiar with this. Even if it's just through cultural osmosis, the peppy 60s jazz, the beautifully rendered backgrounds, and the figures that look like they stepped right out of the globe-trotting big-budget James Bond film series? And this is all because of a simple reason. The crew on Jonny Quest weren't your typical work-a-day animation hands. They were seasoned comic book illustrators, but we'll get back to that. If you're struggling to visualize what I'm talking about, let's do a direct one-to-one comparison. Here's a shot from the opening of Flintstones. You can see the drastic difference between how Flintstones and Quest open their episodes. The Flintstones is a single elongated pan of Fred Flintstone driving a car for 20 seconds. The background is simple, there are very few moving elements, and the visual language of the world isn't too dissimilar from what we've seen from other Hanna-Barbera shows like Yogi, Top Cat, or Huckleberry Hound. It's standard animation drawing. Larger eyes, larger hands and feet, paired with usually an anthropomorphized element. Characters have easily identifiable exaggerated silhouettes. At just a glance, you know what it is. It's a cartoon. The Quest intro has 11 shots in the first 20 seconds. A kid running through a naturalistically painted and rendered forest, pterodactyl, an explosion, a panther, and even a futuristic spider monster. The world is so much more varied. The visual language is almost neoclassical. It's people who have studied in figure painting classics, not the Walt Disney animation minds of the deepest Burbank. Look at how integrated the foreground elements are in the first two shots. They create visual hierarchy and visual dynamism much more than the foreground elements in the Flintstones opening. But before we get too lost in the minutia, let's take a step back and set up some of the facts, so we're all on the same page. If you're familiar with Jonny Quest, you'll have a pretty good rundown here. And if you're unfamiliar, well, Jonny Quest is a science fiction adventure animated show starring a would-be boy adventurer with the quintessentially appropriate surname of Quest. Created by Doug Wildey, the show ran for only one season in its initial run, from 1964 to 1965. However, Jonny Quest was unlike all of the other limited animation TV shows that Hanna-Barbera produced during the 60s. Traditional animation is done by creating many drawings that flash by our eyes at rapid speeds, usually 24 frames per second. Limited animation, pioneered by the company Hanna-Barbera, is the practice of making one drawing and then strategically altering it so that only a single aspect of it moves, thus saving loads of time and money. Basically, the Disney method of producing lavishly created, extremely detailed, almost photoreal animation was too expensive to produce on a TV budget, thus limited animation. Today, many animation fans would point to the Flintstones or Scooby-Doo as the quintessential limited animation television show. However, while those shows did pioneer the art form of corner cutting and cost-saving measures, it wasn't until Jonny Quest that the Hanna-Barbera production team had a stroke of brilliance. Hire comic book illustrators to produce the television show because they thought in static images. Think about it, a comic book is ostensibly a movie broken up into single sustaining images that don't move. Limited animation is a movie broken up into more or less single images that kinda move. Doug Wildey was a comic book artist known primarily for drawing westerns and war comics. While Wildey was born and raised in Yonkers, New York, he spent much of his life in Tucson, Arizona. While stationed at Naval Air Station Base Barbers Point in Honolulu, Hawaii, Wildey got his start as a newspaper illustrator. From there, he moved on to a prolific career illustrating such forgotten classic comics as Buffalo Bill, Gunsmoke, and Indian Fighter. From here, Wildey procured work from a fledgling company called Marvel Comics, where he illustrated Journey into Unknown Worlds, Marvel Tales, and Strange Tales, bouncing around from title to title for the next decade. Wildey would eventually seg into work in animation. In 1962, he would work alongside comic legend Alex Toth on a Canadian TV show, Space Angel, the action-adventure program that was the sister show to cult obsession Clutch Cargo. If you've never seen this weird thing, do yourself a favor, give it a watch. They pioneered an animation technique coined Synchrovox, which basically amounts to using the limited animation of Hanna-Barbera, and then instead of animating the mouths, they would just film live-action actors talking. It's pretty surreal. While working on that show, he discovered that Hanna-Barbera, a much larger and better-paying company, was located just up the street. He went in for an informal meeting to attempt to procure work at that company and discovered that Joe Barbera shared a common interest in adventure serials. By the end of that meeting, Barbera had asked Wildey if he could design a show in the style of the radio drama adventure character Jack Armstrong, which the company was in talks to license. Wildey then set out building a show that would draw upon influences like Dr. No and Frankie Darro movies. Even from its basic setup, Quest was completely unlike what was being attempted in animation at the time. Its mature storylines, naturalistically rendered visual vocabulary, and close to photoreal character designs attracted both children and adults alike. The perfect example of how mature and distinct Jonny Quest was compared to its brethren is season 1, episode episode 10, Shadow of the Condor. It follows Quest's crew, who after their plane is damaged, are forced to seek refuge in the castle of a German baron. This baron is eventually revealed to be a World War I fighter pilot. The episode climaxes in an aerial version of the most dangerous game, with the baron attempting to kill Race Bannon. This episode would be considered mature by today's standards, let alone the fact that it premiered on ABC in September of 1964. Is every episode of Quest perfect? No, it suffers from alternate teams of animators, episodes being taken away from Wildey, and extremely tight deadlines, but overall it's a massive step forward for both the subgenres of animation known as limited animation and the fight to have animation taken seriously by mainstream American culture. While the show was eventually canceled after 26 episodes, the technical strides produced by the show would have ramifications for decades to come. The show was rebooted in 1986 with this new series titled The New Adventures of Jonny Quest, and then again in 1997 with The Real Adventures of Jonny Quest, but it's this first series, and the only series overseen by Wildey, that stands out as the high watermark of narrative and visual storytelling that this became. Well guys, that's it for today's episode. If you enjoyed this video, press that like button. If you haven't yet done so, also hit subscribe. Hopefully, I'll see you guys in the next video.